Money. As we said earlier, money is whatever we say it is. It is a commonly accepted means of exchange to facilitate the trade in goods and services. Now, I tried the other day to go fill my gas tank and pay with a cow, and that didn't really go over too well because they kept looking for a hidden camera. Money used to be precious metals. These, gold and silver, were what was known as intrinsic value. It had value because of itself. Gold and silver have never been worth nothing. In 1100 BC, the Chinese came up with a way to start to represent value by making knives, fish, coins with Chinese characters on them. They started to call this type of money cash. Coins were also starting to be minted, pressed, hammered out into a certain size, and then imprinted with the face of an emperor or a senator, stuff like that. But there was no real way to keep people from trying to cheat the system. As you can see from these coins, they keep getting smaller and smaller because of what is called clipping. Clipping is exactly what it sounds like. It's taking and scraping just the smallest bit of precious metal off of the edge of the coin, thinking nobody's gonna notice, nobody's gonna miss it. And then the dishonest person pretty soon has a pile of precious metal that they can turn back into more money. So basically they were counterfeiting these coins. So to keep that from happening, people started milling or putting ridges and decorative ornamentation on or around the edge so that it would be obvious whether or not somebody was trying to clip or shave little pieces of the coin off. The Spanish came up with their main unit of currency, the real. The real was easily broken into 8 pieces. That's why it got the name a piece of 8. And 2 of these bits was worth 1/4 of the value of a real. And now you know how they came up with the price of a shave and haircut. The first paper money was printed in 785 AD by the Chinese. The Chinese basically was a promissory note saying this piece of paper is worth the value that we assign to it. Trust us. This is what's called fiat money. It's money that is based on trust rather than based on something actual. In the United States, it was about 1760. Ben Franklin printed pounds and shillings in Philadelphia. Now, most of the time, money is considered exchange notes or coins issued by a government entity, but that's not always the case. In Walt Disney in the 70s, Disney World handed out recreation coupons. These were for service recovery. Hey, we're sorry that this happened. Let us make it up to you. Here's a Disney recreation coupon. And it had the redemption value of $1 at Disney World. That turned into the Disney dollars that were popular between 1997 and 2016. The Disney dollars were worth face value. You could go in and you could buy Disney dollars. I had a $100 bill. I go in and I give them a $100 bill. I get back 100 Disney dollars. When I'm visiting my sister out in West Covina, I take a Disney dollar, try to go into 7-Eleven. They're just going to kick me out. But in stores around Orlando and in stores very close to Anaheim, those stores would take Disney dollars as legitimate payment because it was very easy. The cost to them was very low to have somebody go in and exchange Disney dollars for actual Federal Reserve notes. Now, like I said, the Disney dollar program ended in 2016. They're not making any more, so the supply of Disney dollars is fixed. They are never going to make any more Disney dollars. Now, there are also money that used to be money that's no longer money anymore. This is my $100 trillion note from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was having, back in 2008, unbelievable hyperinflation. Prices would essentially double by the hour. and their economy was just in a death spiral. By the time they had to withdraw this money from circulation, the exchange rate was about $1.25. I got my copy off of eBay for roughly $10. The Iraqi dinar is no longer being accepted as currency because the guy's picture on the bill no longer is in charge. Some currency, for counterfeiting measures, is being made pretty. They're trying to make it exquisite and intricate enough so that it'll be difficult to counterfeit. The space over on the left-hand side is for a watermark. You see our friend Mr. Sloth. In Australia, they're working with polymers. They're working with see-through plastics that will add durability to the banknote, but it'll also make it a whole lot more difficult to counterfeit. And then we got our Benjamins. Our money has been recognized as some of the plainest and ugliest money that is in circulation in the world. There are a lot of anti-counterfeiting measures. We've got the security stripe, we've got the color shifting ink, we've got the watermark that's there in the oval on the right-hand side, but it's blah. It's not a happy looking piece of currency. And you look at Ben's face, the look on Ben's face just screams, you're going to spend me on what? Money as a storehouse of value is perfectly liquid. You don't need to do anything to convert that asset into something spendable. I have $100 in my pocket. I can go to any merchant and spend it immediately. Gold is a terrific storehouse of value, but it is not perfectly liquid. I have to go to the gold and silver exchange to change my gold coin into dollars. I'm not going to get me a Happy Meal and give them an ounce of gold that's trading roughly $2,500 an ounce. Liquid assets are also immediately available. I want to go down to 7-Eleven. I want to give them $1. I come back with my Diet Coke. I'm great, but I can't give them some of my stock holdings in exchange for a liter of soda. There are some types of money that I want you to know, but don't fret about. There is what's called M1 money. M1 money is currency and coins. The M1 money is transaction deposits, which are checks. You know, every so often you need 650. And there are also traveler's checks. Now, traveler's checks have been less and less used because of the bigger and wider use of plastic credit cards and debit cards. M2 money is almost liquid money. Certificates of deposit, savings accounts, U.S. savings bonds, money market funds, all of these, you have to go into the bank. You've got to go and do something before you get the money, unlike using your debit card to pull directly out of your checking account. Know these different types of money, but don't spend too much bandwidth getting into them unless you're going to go into economics or finance as a major. And if it makes you feel any comfortable, I'm not going to be testing you on it. It would also be good for you to know the different types of banking institutions, bank and a credit union, as well as knowing how they work, being familiar with the reserve requirements, with assets and liabilities. And the Fed is the main organization that sets monetary policy, the policy of interest rates and supply of money. By making money more or less expensive to borrow, it controls the supply of money in the economy, thus keeping, or trying to keep at any rate, the inflation in check. If interest rates are low, people will be inclined to borrow more because the money is cheap. Conversely, if interest rates are high, people are going to be less likely to borrow because it's going to be more expensive. Monetary policy also tries to keep inflation in check by controlling the supply of money and easing credit in the pipeline. Now, the Federal Reserve has 12 banks run by 12 governors and a president. The Board of Governors meets in Washington, D.C., and they do open market committee functions. The FOMC will look at monetary policy, what the interest rates are going to be, the prime rate, overnight reserve requirements, electronic payment transfers, as well as regulations and bank stress test. So can this bank handle it if everybody shows up and wants to borrow money? The Federal Reserve wants to try and keep unemployment around 5%, and it wants to try and target inflation at around 2%. What I'd like you to do is raise your hand if you have credit cards. Why are you sitting at your computer all alone with your hand raised? You know that the card has an interest rate, and if you're a good steward of your cash, you've read the back of your statement with a microscope and sometimes to see that the interest you pay is prime plus a percentage, or it's based on the prime interest rate. This means that the bank borrows money from a larger bank and in turn charges you a percentage in addition to what it's being charged. That's how the banks make their money. The Fed not only loans money to banks, but it also sets interest rate for interbank loans. Larger banks, Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, have the ability to loan money to smaller banks, Banner Bank, People's Branch of Commerce, as well as to large businesses. My sister used to work at Golden State Sanwa Bank. It was a subsidiary of a very large Japanese international bank. Her job was to process loans to businesses of no less than $10 million. One time she came home, she told me she loaned $250 million overnight to a company. I asked why she would do such a thing, and she explained that the company that wrote the checks were legally required to have the money in the bank by the time they wrote the checks. If they did not, that would be a federal crime known as check kiting. So Friday was payroll day, but Thursday they had already printed and sent out the money. They were not going to get the cash back in their bank to cover all of the payroll, so they would be kiting those payroll checks. They were live checks, and federal banking regulations require that businesses do not kite the checks. Fiscal policy is the work of Congress. It is taxing and spending. Now, if that sentence doesn't send chills down your spine, I don't know what does. I'm going to be breaking this chapter up into two videos. This one is going to cover spending. The other one is going to cover taxing. Now, you're intimately familiar with paying taxes, and you're pretty familiar with receiving the benefits of government spending, but I need you to go slow on this. The work of Congress in fiscal policy is getting the government the money it needs so that it can do its thing, not only for the economy, but for the nation. The two biggest players in the fiscal policy realm are Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes. Now, Adam Smith wrote On the Wealth of Nations back in 1776 that promoted a simple notion: leave the economy alone. And this is the driving theory behind fiscal policy of the United States from 1776 through about 1932-33. The classical policy, the laissez-faire field of thought, is by Adam Smith saying, leave it alone and it'll behave itself. Following the invisible hand, we will get low prices and full employment. Inherent in this policy is a reliance on Say's law. Say's law, John Baptiste Say, put forward that supply would create its own demand. When people make things, that will generate the ability to buy things, leading people the ability to make more things. Essentially, it's an if you build it, they will come attitude. You've heard of supply side economics. That's what this is in a overly simplified nutshell. And this quote by Say is a perfect definition of wealth, moving assets from lower to higher valued uses. In 1936, John Maynard Keynes wrote the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. And he said that basically the government has to directly intervene in the economy because the economy will not behave itself when it's left alone. The things that should not happen in perfect competition, monopolies and market failures and stuff like that, end up happening. So the government acting on the economy can increase output without changing prices. Now, there are some other fiscal policy ideas, none of which are really right and none of which are really wrong. They're more theories of how the economy can work. An intermediate policy is kind of a milkshake of the former two. The economy will not behave itself if it's left alone, so that's downplaying Smith. But they also think that Keynes was blowing it out when he said that increasing supply will not change prices. We look at the law of supply. Change in supply means a change in price. There is a monetarist, not monetary, monetarist policy that says by controlling the money supply in the economy, the government can regulate the economy, thereby avoiding Smith and Keynes. Best way to think about this is Adam Smith is the accelerator, John Maynard Keynes is the brake, and the monetarist policy is downshifting gears rather than using the accelerator and the brake to change the speed of the car. There's a rational expectations policy. This says that the buyers and sellers of goods and services will act to head off government intervention. By acting before the government forces action, the buyers and sellers regulate the economy and leave the government pretty much out of it. This is government intervention kind of one step removed. The government gets what it wants through the potential threat of action. This is similar to what happened in the movies with the Hays Code back in the 30s and later the MPAA ratings. Debt, deficit, and crowding out. The deficit is the amount you don't have. It's the difference between what is brought in and what is spent. If you make $100 and you spend $150, that extra $50 is your deficit for that month. The debt is your combined deficits over time. If you consistently spend more than you take in, you're creating debt for yourself. Think of your credit card. You spend $150, you pay $100. That $50 deficit, next month you add that $50 plus another $50, you're now $100 in debt. Debt is essentially borrowing money from your future self, because your future self, you're spending it now, but your future self has to pay it back. Crowding out. Money costs. When you borrow money, you have to pay for that privilege. The payment of interest on money has to be part of the budget. By maintaining a debt, you're spending money to maintain that debt when you could be spending money on something else. When the interest payments get so big, you're going to have to cut programs and spending just so that you can maintain interest on the debt. This is called crowding out. Spending on interest crowds out spending on other priorities. Practical example of this was that when gas prices got really expensive a while back, people finally found that they were not able to spend all they wanted on motoring about and joyrides and stuff like that, as well as all of the other things they wanted to do. Spending on gasoline took up spending on other things, things that had a more elastic price than gasoline. Now, there were some fools who subsequently made the news. These fools made themselves face the idiot decision of, do I buy gas for the car or do I buy food for the kids? Now, that is a no-brainer. Cancel the cable, reduce the phone bill, keep your kids fed nutritious food. The federal budget process. Excuse me. The federal budget process is something that you should read about when you're having trouble sleeping, because while it is vital to the nation's well-being, not only... Sorry about that. To deficit or not deficit? That is the question. Now, the government's going to overspend as surely as the sun rises in the east. The book has some good pro-con arguments about deficit spending and whether running a deficit is a good thing or not. In the last 40 years, there was only 4 years during the Clinton-Gingrich times that we actually made more than we spent. We had a 4-year surplus, and we were able to pay down roughly $500 billion of the debt. Then September 11th came, and we had to go spend on a war footing. You see the recession of 2008, and the average 2029 is 4.7. That has not taken into account the Rona recession. I tend to believe that we need to spend what we must when we must, but we also have to pay down the debt every chance we get. Chapter 12, Part 2, Fiscal Policy. Now, one of the things that Uncle Sam does to justify Congress's existence is to tax us. So, let's talk about taxes, shall we? Taxes are a form of income redistribution. Now, I am not getting into the politics or ideology behind whether or taxes are good or bad. This is not political science, this is economics. However, income redistribution is just what it says, taking money from someone and giving it to someone else. When it is done voluntarily, it's called charity. The Salvation Army, United Way, all of these participate in and actually rely on income redistribution. Bill Gates gave UW a new computer lab several years ago, and he also gave $20 million to the Seattle libraries. He fitted out Harvard with a new computer lab. These are all voluntary donations. The trick comes when the government gets involved. The government gets involved in income redistribution mostly through taxes, and the most widely known tax is the income tax. Depending on how much you make, you pay a percentage of those earnings to help support the operation of the government. There are also sales taxes, excise or luxury taxes, customs duties, property taxes, capital gains taxes, as well as user fees and licenses, which are different names, but they're also a tax. Unlike donations, taxes are not voluntary. If you do not pay your taxes, you get to go to jail. If you have questions about the income redistribution, ask the questions in the forum. There are some concerns in the tax realm. First concern is efficiency. Is the collection of the tax worth it? A sales tax is a very efficient tax because it's very easy to collect. You don't leave the store unless you pay the sales tax. On the other hand, when taxes are difficult to collect and taxpayers work hard to evade the tax, that is not really an efficient tax. The sales tax in California. Some people evade it by coming up to Oregon to buy stuff without paying 10% sales tax in California. It's not very efficient tax in Siskiyou County, in Vancouver, Washington, or over by Boise. But if you live in sunny San Diego, you're not going to schlep all the way here to the Beaver State to save on grocery taxes. Then there's equity. Is the tax fair for everybody involved at all income levels involved? This is unfortunately a very subjective measure and depends greatly on the perception of the tax. There are three types of tax systems. There's the progressive, regressive, and proportional. And in this case, progressive does not have, again, it does not have any connection with the politics of it. A progressive tax is one where the percentage of tax burden increases as the income increases. We're talking about percentage of tax burden. So somebody making $25,000 would pay this much of their income in the tax. And somebody making $250,000 would pay that much of their income as a tax. So that's what we mean by percentage of tax burden. Then there is a regressive tax. A regressive tax is where the percentage of tax burden decreases as a person's income increases. A sales tax, even though it is a set percentage, hits the lower incomes harder because they are paying a larger percentage of their income to service the tax. This is not a flat tax. Even though the sales tax is a set number, this is not a flat tax in economics terms. A flat tax would be more appropriately called a proportional tax. A proportional tax is where, regardless of your income, you pay a certain percent of that income. So, if you make $25,000, you pay the same percentage, you have the same percentage of tax burden as somebody who's making $250,000. This is an idea that has been widely known as a flat tax. There have also been some refinements of the flat tax. One politician, Steve Forbes, who ran in 1992 on the Republican side, said that he would exempt the first $36,000 tax-free. At the time, it would have benefited about 50-60% of the lowest earners in the nation. Looking at it this way, the first $36,000 is not taxed. So if you make $33,000, you pay zero federal tax. If you make $50,000, the first $36,000 is not taxed, so you're going to be taxed on the $14,000. The reason that they call it a flat tax is because whatever that number minus $36,000, you pay 17% on $14,000. If you're a millionaire, you get the first $36,000 free, and then you pay 17% on whatever is left over. This is seen as a more fair tax bracket because it's seen as everybody paying a fairer share. If you have questions about progressive, regressive, and proportional flat taxes, ask them in the forums. Please ask them in the forums. Government transfers. This is where individuals receive money or goods from the government. The recipient does not directly pay for these goods as such because any money that the government spends has to come from the taxpayers. So, direct transfers where people get actual cash money. In-kind transfers are the food stamps, are the Women, Infants, Children's, the TANF program. Unemployment insurance is a direct cash payment. Income redistribution does not necessarily always go from the rich to the poor. There are subsidies for museums, for the arts, for municipal stadiums. These places don't get food stamps. They get considerations with tax cuts, rate cuts on utilities, all sorts of different financial incentives that they keep the money rather than spending the money for a certain amount of time. Then they have to go and start paying that money. Some people say that this type of income redistribution sounds like these transfers are taking food out of the poor people's mouths just so that we can build another skybox at Raider Stadium. That's not the way it is. It does not take directly from anyone. It reduces the amount that is available to everyone. So think of it as dipping a bucket out of the swimming pool. There's a little less to go around for everybody, but when you have so many buckets dipping into the swimming pool for so many different projects, it can make a difference. And the difference it makes is where liberals and conservatives differ. Now, what I'd like you not to worry about is the debt pyramid, don't worry about the fiscal years, and don't worry about monetizing the deficit. The one thing that I do want to emphasize that is inflation is a tax on the poor and the thrifty because it reduces the buying power of their dollars. You've heard the statement, a penny saved is a penny earned, unless you've saved that penny so long that the buying power of that penny is reduced significantly over time.